Our case today has a little bit of everything, which makes for a good tragedy. Love, loss, irony, redemption, relapse, gore, and revenge. It takes place in a time of rapid growth and change for Clinton and Lyons, Iowa, the early 1870s. Clinton, one day to be an opulent lumber boomtown, was beginning to pick up speed and make a name for itself. Broad, sandy streets were bordered by sturdy sidewalks, neat cottages, and palatial residences, along with storefronts, houses, and no less than 7 impressive churches. Immigrants of Dutch, German, and Irish descent all settled in the area, and most of all, the newly built Chicago and Northwestern Railroad had helped to finally push Clinton's size up and over that of neighboring Lyons, Iowa. The men of Clinton labored during the day and evening in the sasheries, fisheries, and sawmills along the river. But at night, many of them headed not right to one of those neat cottages or to one of the large, impressive churches, but to a different place, an island just across from South Clinton, situated beneath the old railroad bridge. Little Rock Island. Little Rock Island is one of the more noteworthy islands in a cluster of them between East and South Clinton. It technically falls into the bounds of Garden Plain, Illinois, an important fact to remember, but it sits closer to Iowa than to Illinois' main shore. That being said, it was never as inhabited as the largest of the islands, Beaver Island, and is only half the size of its closest neighbor, Willow Island. But it has in common with its neighbors its natural beauty, plentiful tree cover, mostly silver maples, which easily survive the annual flooding. The Mississippi laps at the shores, calmly on the east side and quicker on the west. Brush, wildflowers, and small animals all find their home there too. Today, it is vacant of people, but in 1872, it was inhabited by a variety of characters. Some were respected members of society with nice houses used for social galas covered in the papers. Others were laboring men who journeyed to Clinton daily via a ladder to cross by the railroad bridge or by way of the Rexford ferry. But the men didn't come to visit these people in the evenings. They came to visit a large frame-style house just south of the overhanging railroad bridge, with a small farming operation around the outside. Known as O'Neill's Ranch to the locals, the house boasted all of the illicit and carnal pleasures any man could want. Downstairs was a saloon and dance hall with a live-in fiddle player and saloon keeper. Upstairs were bedrooms where the bigger business was held, a brothel. In the 1870s, there were no less than 5 women listed as living there with the O'Neills, whose occupations were listed as quote-unquote uncertain in the census, and an additional 2 women were referred to as seamstresses. In 1872, the year of our case, there were likely even more women employed there. Even for a brothel, the ranch had a reputation for being dirty and dangerous, thanks in no small part to its owner-operators. The O'Neill Ranch was run by the 3 O'Neill brothers, Jack, Joseph, and Tommy, who was also a little person. Jack, 35 at the time, was the straightest of them, the oldest, the property owner, and keeper of the saloon. Next was Joseph at 28, a quick-tempered, stout, and solidly built man who worked as the ranch pimp. Finally, there was Tommy, who followed along with whatever his brothers endeavored to do. Their mother lived in the area too, but she had little to do with the family business. The 3 had been born in Ohio, but spent most of their lives in the Galena area, where they were known to cause trouble. For many years, they formed a river gang and robbed boats and belongings along the Mississippi before settling on Little Rock Island. They bragged openly about the men they killed during these escapades to anyone who would listen. Additionally, all 3 had innate passions for drinking and fighting. These, paired with the island's nature, being dense with forest and separated from the mainland, made for an even seedier situation. After the O'Neills began the ranch bodies were reported to be found along the island's shores with an imprint of a club on their heads, while other visitors came and were never seen again. But despite the reputation, an arrangement between the O'Neills and another family on the island, the Rexfords, kept patrons coming day after day. The father Rexford was a respected man who served as the watcher of the bridge, while his son Hiram operated the ferry. Hiram was only 19 that year, and not regarded highly as his father was. In fact, some described him as, quote, a weak botch of a man, unquote, and he was known to regularly haunt the O'Neill ranch when not running the ferry. Despite these shortcomings, Rexford managed to find a wife and marry her on May 17th of 1872, a woman by the name of Mary Jones, aged 21. Mary was born in New York, but in the years before her marriage to Rexford had worked as a domestic servant in the Clinton County Poor Farm. They married in Clinton before Hiram took her back to the shanty he owned with his parents on the northern tip of Little Rock Island. The marriage was not long-lived, at least not in the sense of companionship. Hiram would eventually drop her off at the O'Neills' ranch to make money and have little to do with her for some time. At the ranch, Mary did as she was expected to, becoming an employee of the ranch's upstairs. The unpleasantness of the work can only be imagined. Prostitution in the 1800s was as awful as it has ever been. In a time of little knowledge about STDs, illness spread like wildfire among sex workers. Pregnancies ended in death, and rape was commonplace. Police departments, given a cut, often looked the other way. While some brothels offered protection and even decision-making power to the women in their employ, it's unlikely that the women of the ranch had this luxury, given the character of the O'Neills. At the ranch, Mary made the acquaintance of another woman working there, Adelia Clark, who was described by the papers as a fallen star. She had once come from a wealthier family and even had an education. She was regarded as smart and fair, and seemed to have become a facet of the house during her tenure. Before being taken to the island, she was living with family in Comanche. She and Mary shared a few things in common. They were only 2 years apart, and both had originally been born in New York. The summer of 1872 likely saw good business for the O'Neills as Clinton continued to grow. Jack made his money at the bar, and Joe kept the upstairs in line. As the days passed, a strange thing began to occur. Joseph, never married, a brash and aggressive pimp, began to strike up a different kind of relationship with Mary Rexford, and the two soon became an item. They even married. Joe told Mary that he planned on straightening up and on leaving the island with her to move to Clinton to begin their new life. There was symmetry to it all. Hiram had brought her to the island, and Joe would take her away. But this was never to be. As Joe and Mary continued their relationship, Hiram took notice. After leaving her on her own for the better part of the summer, he began to approach her too, flirting, touching. It's unknown if Mary reciprocated, but likely that she did. The crew of the O'Neill ranch noticed Hiram's renewed affections, and most importantly, Joe noticed. Joe, being a fighter and strong man, told Hiram in no unclear terms to stay away from Mary or he would lick him. And Hiram promised to oblige. He denied the accusations vehemently, but Joe's friends continued to report treachery to him, unbeknownst to Hiram. Hiram was friendly to the O'Neills after Joe's confrontation, but he didn't keep his end of the bargain. In addition to continuing his advances towards Mary, he would go around the island and boast that in fact he, Hiram Rexford, could lick Joe O'Neill. It wasn't long before the news would reach the O'Neills. Joe, who had so hoped to turn over a new leaf, who had given Hiram a chance to stop, was enraged. He gathered Tommy to him, and a plan was made over drinks. Neither told Jack or any of the women at the ranch about this plan. Thursday, September 26, 1872, started cold and dry, much colder than most September days, it being only 48 degrees Fahrenheit at 8 a.m. A light breeze moved through the trees, and the sky was clear. Joseph and Tommy probably moved about their duties concerning the farm animals, while Hiram Rexford went through the normal routine of his morning for the final time, likely slipping on his jacket and bringing passengers up to Lyons for work in the boat. Before noon, Joe and Tommy set out to traverse the island in search of Hiram Rexford. After going to several houses with no luck, even to his father's house, they left word for Hiram that they would like to employ him to paint their upstairs hallway at the ranch. Rexford received the message upon returning home and agreed, gathering his items to head over, unknowing that his earlier boasts had reached the wrong ears. At the ranch, Joe was indulging in liquor, as he was known to do. It was quiet and unlikely that it was busy in the saloon downstairs. Jack O'Neill and another ranch worker, John Collins, were off the island in search of horses they'd recently lost. The women of the house went about their tasks, a few bringing customers up to their rooms. Tommy grabbed one of the women and headed to an upstairs bedroom, while Joe went upstairs as well, to the bedroom where Mary laid, recovering from an illness. Then they waited. Adelia Clark likely greeted the familiar Rexford as he entered and headed up the stairs before returning to her cleaning. His presence wasn't unusual, as he was known to be an odd jobber and a frequent patron of the ranch's activities. She likely also knew about the tension and arguments between Joe and him, but being a smart girl, she would have stayed out. She may have expected to hear some bickering later on upstairs. She likely did not expect what would happen next. The specific wording of the initial contact is disputed between the papers, but the testimonies boil down to this sequence of events. Hiram had set to work painting in the hall. Hearing Joe enter from one of the bedrooms, he greeted him with, "Hello, Joe," his eyes still on his work. Joe requested a ride in the ferry. Hiram said he would oblige when he had finished painting. At this time, he likely looked up to see Joe, stout, muscular, and aggressive just in stature. Joe was quite drunk now, and had grabbed a nearby shelf board standing over Rexford. "So you can lick me, huh?" Hiram's relaxed tone changed, and he rose to his feet, crying, "Oh my God, I know you can lick me, Joe. If I have injured you, I am sorry." But his protestations were too little, too late. Joe struck him over the head with the board, knocking him to the ground. Hiram didn't get a single strike in before O'Neill was stomping on his face, breaking the bones over and over until his visage resembled little more than a bloody pool of snot, teeth, and torn skin. It wasn't enough for Joe. He ran to the room and dragged Mary out of the bed, pulling her to the gruesome scene, showing her what he had done and forcing her to look. Adelia, hearing the screams from downstairs, ran up and managed to pull Joe away from the body, and he retreated into the bedroom with Mary. Joe prepared to speak when he heard a groan from the hallway. Quickly, he jumped to his feet and pulled out his pocket knife before heading to the hallway to finish his work, complaining, "Isn't that son of a bitch dead yet?" By the end of his session, Rexford's body had been stabbed in the head and chest at least 25 times. Joe called for Adelia, who brought him the supplies to begin washing. Doors from the surrounding bedrooms opened, the Tricks looking over the scene. Tommy came out and looked over the corpse nonchalantly and gave it a good kick with a few choice words. Nobody tried to intervene. Looking through the doorway, Joe perceived some more movement from the body, and with an angry exclamation, headed downstairs where he retrieved an axe. He returned to the body and bashed at the head and neck until they were nearly separated. Put the axe down. He was reported to be calm now. Joe had purged his rage. The patrons, ladies, and Tommy were quiet and solemn as the reality began to sink in. With assistance from Tommy and Adelia, Joe cleaned up, changed, and hid his bloody clothes. Knowing that Jack would return soon, he made his way over to the Illinois shore with Tommy in tow. Jack returned to the ranch shortly after and was quickly approached by Adelia and the others. Being told of the incident, Jack acted quickly, riding up to Fulton and fetching the police. This triggered a manhunt for the two remaining O'Neill brothers across Fulton, Clinton, and Lyons. On Little Rock Island, the heartbroken parents of Hiram Rexford came to collect the mangled remains and bring what was left of their son home. By 10 o'clock, it was cold again. The sky was clear and starry, the wind totally still. A horse and carriage clopped down the dirt streets in Fulton, breaking the eerie silence. The sheriff, posted on the corner and fulfilling his patrol duties, spied the carriage heading towards the train depot and felt it was going a bit too fast. He waved for it to slow, but it did not. Finally, he chased it down and grabbed the horse's head. The driver, a short, muscular man, attempted to fight and flee, but the sheriff's pistol persuaded him and his short passenger otherwise. A passerby confirmed the two's identities, and it was off to jail for Joseph and Thomas O'Neill. Jack, too, was briefly arrested, but he was released soon after having been proven innocent of any willful connection. The butchery on Little Rock Island quickly became a local media frenzy, with papers printing the stories that evening and even the very next day. Eventually, the gruesome event would make papers as far off as New York, and gathered interest from Chicago during the trial and subsequent events. Due to the high levels of excitement in the Narrows area, a change of location was granted, and Joseph and Tommy were not tried in the Whiteside County Courthouse. The trial was held instead in April of 1873 at the Mount Carroll Courthouse. Adelia and Mary served as principal witnesses. Joseph admitted his guilt, but maintained that Tommy was free of wrongdoing and had not even been a participant. In the end, Tommy was given 16 years in the penitentiary, a sentence later reduced to 14. Even though Little Rock Island was only a few hundred yards away from Iowa, which did not have the death penalty, the murder still occurred in Illinois, and Joseph was ordered to be hung a few weeks after. The ranch and the remaining O'Neills were reeling with the news. Adelia attempted suicide but was unsuccessful. Tommy was quickly sent to prison. In the county jail, Joseph tried to make the most of his time left and received somber visits from Jack and his elderly Irish mother. He seemed to spend much time praying on the floor and talking with priests. The day before the execution, guards were sent to check on Joe in his cell, but he was not there. A quick check revealed that he had managed to tunnel 9 feet into the dirt and rock below his cell. His escape attempt was unsuccessful. The final visit from his mother and older brother the morning of the hanging was tearful. Jack paced constantly, swearing off his old ways and crying. His mother talked with Joe before leaving sullenly. Joe was reported to have eaten a good breakfast, his last meal, and told his attendants that he was determined to face his death like a man. Now sober, he was described as being grateful and courteous to both the priests and the sheriff. News of the event had spread throughout the area, and a large crowd had amassed around the courthouse. Anticipating this, the sheriff of Carroll County had ordered the construction of a picket enclosure around the front yard in the days prior. The scaffold was erected below one of the poplar trees, complete with a drop and a lever. When the time came, Joseph O'Neill was guided out of the jail and into the sun, then up onto the platform of the scaffold. As fortune would have it, his final day, May 23, 1873, was peaceful. It was warm and sunny with a gentle breeze. Inside the picket enclosure were roughly 100 pre-approved attendees, including family members and county employees. On the scaffold, Joe quivered but otherwise held his nerve. The priests administered their last rites. Joe kissed his crucifix and gave his last words, admitting again his guilt and trying again to absolve his little brother Tommy. He then took his place over the drop, donned the black cap and noose about his neck, and stood to meet his fate. At 11 a.m. exactly, the sheriff pulled the lever. Nothing happened. Joseph O'Neill remained standing and still. After a silent moment had passed, the sheriff strode forward and stomped on the drop door, causing it to fall open. Joe hung with a thud. Motionless for some seconds, his body flaccid and twisting with the rope in the breeze. Then a sudden struggle for life. The body kicked, the arms flailed and jerked for nearly 4 minutes before gradually weakening and going limp, with no motion left but the occasional quiver or gurgle from the pinched throat. A pulse was taken by the doctors on hand. His heart was beating strongly, and some concluded that he was dying of suffocation. Again, he was left to hang. After some minutes, his heart was still heard to be beating, and he remained hanging there for another 12 minutes before a temperature was taken. His body was still warm, 98 degrees, and the pulse was weak. After 17 minutes, the cold body was determined to be dead and was eventually cut down. Ironically, Joe had been checked 3 times to ensure he was dead, the same number of times he had attacked Hiram Rexford to ensure the same. The hood was removed, and a final look was granted to those in the enclosure of the corpse's face. It was remarked to look much the same as it had when the hood was placed on it. The deep blue mark from the noose stood out starkly on the neck. The body was placed in a coffin and returned to Little Rock Island for a rousing wake, and it was then buried in a cemetery in Clinton. Oddly enough, at the same time the year after, the sheriff studied the poplar trees in front of the courthouse and remarked that one of them had not sprouted any leaves, the same tree that held the rope from which Joseph O'Neill hung. Thus ended the stories of Joseph O'Neill and Hiram Rexford, 2 young men that it was remarked for the world to be better without. Those who survived them changed. Tommy remained in prison for the duration of his sentence and was quietly released. Jack picked up from Little Rock Island and took his houseboat down the river, likely to St. Louis. Adelia left the area, while Mary's fate remains unknown. The remaining Rexfords purchased a plot of land on the southern tip of a peninsula on the Illinois shore beside Willow Island. Eventually, the slough to the east of it was named the Rexford Slough. Today, it is known as Cattail Slough. The C&N.W. Railroad Bridge was eventually destroyed, and a new and improved bridge erected exactly beside it close to the turn of the century. Today, one can still see the pylons of that original bridge jutting up from the river beside the new bridge. The O'Neill's house decayed and was destroyed. After Iowa became a dry state, Little Rock Island became a known hub of illegal drinking and served as the temporary quarters for many a ruffian, something I'm sure would have made the O'Neills proud. This lasted all the way up until the 1930s, when the dam system was put in on the river, and that greatly changed the layout of all the islands on the Mississippi. Today, no houses remain standing on the island, and no people lived there either. Time has buried it all.